So let's get to the next roundtable, which has as a subtitle within the category of sustainability, the topic of innovation. So here we could say the sustainability and innovation are by definition together, because everything that we've seen emerging in terms of sustainability has been the fruit of an innovative process. First of all, I wish to thank our speakers that I see are already connected. So thank you, Andrew Barr, who's Vice President of Hitachi and CEO of Hitachi Rail Group, Roberto Colaninno, President of Piaggio, and Giuseppe Lavazza, that has a logo behind him, fantastic, Lavazza, Vice President of the Lavazza Group. So Mr. Barr, obviously, if we talk about rail, we could say that rail is a sustainable, so there's not very much to do in terms of sustainability there. It is the means of transport that in terms of emissions, CO2 emissions, guarantees the best sustainable, environmental sustainability. So what are you doing on the front of sustainability at the moment?
Buongiorno, thank you very much. Firstly to San Patrignano and Confindustria for inviting me to speak today. Very happy to talk about Hitachi Rail and what we're doing in this space. Transportation for us plays a very integral role as a fundamental part of our communities, and particularly in large cities as well as the countryside. We believe that transport enhancements and improvements allow connectivity and allow people to enjoy the wider benefits in life. And also it's a key contributor to sustainability with green alternatives already available, and probably more to come. Hitachi has long-term environmental targets, particularly striving to reduce carbon usage and get to carbon neutrality in our own business by 2030, with an 80% CO2 reduction in emissions across our value chain by 2050. As a leading mobility business globally, we have an important role to play, driving so-called modal shift and encouraging people onto rail, onto trains, because this is the cleanest way to transport large amounts of people across short and long distances. Our own trains are moving people in over 20 countries globally, with technology in particular of electric trains, which are aimed at reducing CO2 emissions on our own fleets, as well as putting people onto the trains, which reduces other fossil fuel usage in the wider area, and ultimately reducing consumption of energy. We have technologies such as battery trains now in test, and our trains themselves have a very strong environmental approach. So our ETR 1000 Frecciarossa in Italy has a recyclability of over 95%, and our other high-frequency trains are very similar. We have a new product called the Rock, which is a hybrid multiple unit. This is equipped with batteries to allow it to run on long stretches of track on its own power, generated by usage from the grid. We believe that battery power is the cleanest zero-emission solution, which can ultimately replace diesel trains and start achieving climate change targets, and also improving air quality, and cities in particular with our non-electrified lengths of track and stations. So we're exploring a lot of options on that technology right now, including in the UK, fitting our existing regional trains with these battery technology, and a trial is due to start this year, and they'll be able to enter onto routes currently run by diesel trains in battery mode, which of course will help to improve air quality and make train stations much cleaner. At the beginning of this year, we also unveiled our battery tram, zero-emission battery tram in Florence. The tram running on battery, of course, means there's no need for overhead wires in the historic cities, and other electrical infrastructure is not needed also, which saves on cost, but also improves on visual impact. And these onboard batteries also could be recharged by regeneration during braking. So the tram in particular adds to the growing list of products we're already developing, and we're putting decarbonisation and sustainability at the heart of our future global strategy.
Can you see me now? Okay, thank you very much. I'll go back to this topic with you, Mr. Barr. Besides the experiments that you carried out, the first experiments, I would like to understand what kind of synergies you can develop between the railroad industry, which is sustainable by definition, and the industry that rotates around it. But let me go to Mr. Colaninno first. Because of your occupation, you deal with sustainable mobility by definition. For a group such as Piaggio, first of all, I need to understand what kind of contribution you provide and also your vision on sustainable mobility. In this period of time, mobility has become almost sustainable because it's non-existent. We are all stuck at home. We've seen the results also in large cities, but imagining a normal or a near normal world, post-COVID world, what is your contribution? What is the contribution that you can give, and what reflections have you made? Before getting into this specific topic, I'd like to say that Piaggio in the last 10 years has changed its DNA completely. It went from being a typically Italian or maybe European company, it has become an international company acting in all global markets. And as part of this experience, it encountered the issue of mobility, which, if you will, depends on the country where you're in. If you think of mobility in a city such as New Delhi or Bombay, it's totally different as compared to the issue of mobility in European cities. If you think of mobility in China or mobility in large cities, which is really problematic, well, we have gone through, we were faced with a demand for the environment that is totally different and very complex, depending on the place. We did not adapt to the various situations that we needed to interpret in order to manufacture products that were in line with environmental requirements. So we thought that we needed to develop our experience in Boston in a center that we own, a center of future-oriented technology based on robots. Together with the MIT and Harvard, we developed our early experience. In this center, we developed a few ideas that will certainly be further developed in the future. They seem to be futuristic, almost unrealistic. So the future urbanization of our cities, instead of depending on 2- or 4-wheel mobility trains and trams, we imagine mobility to be on foot, rediscovering pedestrian mobility. It may sound a weird idea or a theoretical idea, but it has already started to be implemented in some projects that are currently being studied and developed at the MIT. Projects that are connected with future developments of the current metropolis, which will become a megalopolis, probably. Large cities where lots of people will live and concentrate with no experience with the past as we know it. So cities are certainly going to grow from metropolis. They will develop into megalopolis. An example of megalopolis in Italy is Turin, Milan. Turin and Milan are now a single urban conglomerate where mobility is totally different as compared to 40, 50 years ago. These urban situations will generate neighborhoods or units that will be self-sufficient in terms of services offered to the population. Districts or neighborhoods where access will no longer require large traditional mobility instruments like cars, motorbikes, trams, or buses, but mobility will be mainly pedestrian. There will be incentives to foster the development of pedestrian mobility. What does this mean? We are studying, and we've already developed the first few prototypes, and we are studying units, i.e. robots, that can support pedestrian mobility. We've seen, together with these two major universities, and especially their departments of artificial intelligence, we've seen that these products, these supports, let's call them supports, to a different type of mobility because the urban context will be different. I mean, these could be the instruments in 5 to 10 years' time, the instruments that will trigger innovation by definition. Let me refer to the innovation that was generated by Vespa. Vespa was introduced in Italy after the Second World War. There was a specific need for mobility, and this company, my company, with the development of this moped, incentivized a certain type of mobility and built the story of a company, the history of this company that we all know. And it's a history made of typically Italian excellent products. Now, this may sound like entrepreneurial fantasy, but we do believe that in order to solve the problems that we are faced with today, the big problems of environmental pollution specifically, for sure, electric engines, if we think of mobility based on wheels, vehicles, this is certainly very important. But it's not decisive. I mean, today we have about 1.6 vehicles, four-wheel vehicles worldwide. If you just think at how long it takes for this 1.6 billion vehicles to be replaced by 1.6 billion electric vehicles, to generate a final change in CO2 emissions, I mean, I cannot even imagine how long it would take, or in terms of time, or how much it would take in terms of money, or technological abilities that would be required to change a society that was born with oil and transform it into something totally different. So for sure, in the domain of mobility where Piaggio works, and through the experiences that we have to develop, and we have to use our experience to change contexts such as India, Indonesia, Africa, China. So these realities are totally different from the European realities in terms of size, and they're totally different from the realities and size of what we have in the US or Canada. In our considerations concerning what we should do in order to improve sustainability in general, we often forget, or we only superficially talk about Africa. And we are only marginally talking about South American countries such as Brazil, where all problems that derive from the annual destruction of forests that unquestionably contribute to increase general pollution of our planet. So through this experience, which is extraordinary, the experience that we developed in Boston, at the moment we have 60 young people employed there. They all come from the universities based in the Boston area. So these people are aged between 24 and 28 years. Surprisingly enough, for someone like me with a European culture, these people are being confronted with a financial, behavioral, social world that is totally different from ours. And these people are certainly very open to these big changes. Very often, we fail to understand the behavior of young people in terms of product consumption, and this is certainly due to the fact that we are not mentally open to these new worlds or these new realities of way of living, especially in Italy, whereas especially in the US and in China, these models are emerging strongly. I'll come back to you for the second topic that you were addressing. It's very interesting. You reminded us of how hard it would be to transition 1.6 billion vehicles from fossil fuels to electricity. I mean, it's a sort of utopia, and one can hardly imagine that. I don't even know if it's a positive utopia, but I'm not an expert. I cannot say that. I'd like to ask something to Mr. Lavazza. Now, before I get to the second round, to your overall vision of sustainability, before doing that, I'd like to understand how a number of elements in terms of investment in innovation, but also agreements, partnerships, institutional partnerships with other subjects, how has this allowed you to react and respond to the pandemics? And then I'll ask you questions about circularity and the symbiosis or synergies that are necessary in order to become sustainable. I'd like to focus on the last few months. Over to you.
Thank you. Certainly, we are committed and have been committed for many years in Lavazza on the topics of sustainability and social responsibility. We have started this path at the beginning of the 2000s after a great crisis that had turned upside down the main coffee-producing countries after a fall in prices and consequences of social nature that was very, very impactful. So from that moment, from that time, our journey started. And so it's been many years that in Lavazza we have to deal with three main aspects connected to social responsibility and sustainability that are strictly correlated to environment, to social sustainability that I already mentioned, and of course climate change. All of this has also endured very accelerated development due to the effects of globalization and especially a series of international initiatives, Global Compact and the UN 2030 agenda, to which, of course, our company has adhered with great enthusiasm. And so within the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, I would like to quote the 17th, which substantially traces a very important direction in terms of partnerships per objectives that seems to me centered in terms of the question that you have asked me. Obviously, all efforts that tries to give a contribution and provide an impact can be significant only if we can network a series of experiences and skills and competencies, and this has been our journey so far, both in terms of aspects connected to climate change, both in terms of aspects connected to the environment and social sustainability. As far as the environment is concerned and climate change, we've worked with many university institutions, and we got to our declaration of intent, which is condensed in what we have defined roadmap to zero, namely the necessity for a group to get to carbon neutrality by 2030, with zero of the total of our emissions of CO2. Obviously, this journey is structured in different phases, but we can already say that in 2020, 2021, we closed the first two steps that got us to neutrality in terms of all direct and indirect emissions connected to our business. And for 2030, we intend to close the circle with the neutralization of all the activity downstream and upstream that are correlated with our company activity. Our approach has been very simple because it's based on 4 fundamental points: creating awareness within our organization, the necessity to progressively become a company that is oriented on carbon neutrality, a very strict monitoring of all activities to be kept in check, and a progressive reduction of effective intervention to mitigate and limit a series of activities that can have an impact on the very important objective, and also activities of compensation, which will serve to finance a series of interventions that are going to mitigate and compensate those emissions that we will not be able to completely eliminate. So the effort for cooperation of the company has also been very important, and we have many partnerships going, most of them in pre-competitive key. And I think this is very important because the effort is indeed a global effort and goes beyond the positions that single companies and operators can have on different markets. So obviously the objectives are economic and financial too. So I would like to talk about also, because Andrea Illy, my friend, was talking before me, a research on the Arabica coffee genome that we have conducted together. This research has been very important, and it has been at the disposal of the World Coffee Research to protect biodiversity of coffee and study particularly the possibility to develop and reproduce species that are so important for our specific activity, because we do need a large biodiversity, natural diversity, to be able to provide our customers with our products, and to be able that coffee continues to be a contemporary product required on a global level with a growth perspective. Another important collaboration is set out with this iCoffee initiative, in which we are working closely to reduce the use of pesticides within the world of green coffee production, so in the main producing countries. So we are working with a reference research center in France called CIRAD, and also there are other activities like International Coffee Partner. Those are activities that wish to develop advanced agricultural technologies that can respect the environment and increase productivity and improve life conditions of the different production communities, local production communities. And this is an activity that we are carrying out in partnership with many different companies of our sector, our competitors indeed, but we have united in order to give an effective response. Coffee and Climate, which is another initiative that wants to study intervention to mitigate the effects of climate change that are very important on coffee, because this is a very fragile and vulnerable sector from this point of view. And of course, all of the projects that are carried out by the Lavazza Foundation of intervention in the main producing countries. And we are working with many different partners, Microsoft Colombia, where we have carried out an important project of development and connectivity in the most rural and remote areas where the possibility of using internet was a dream, up to the moment when we managed with this system together with Microsoft to create a primordial but efficient network that allows not only to serve the community with telemedicine services, but also to support all the farmers with data that are gathered periodically thanks to sensors positioned inside the cultivations of coffee to help them manage the inputs and outputs of their activity better. Also, I would like to talk about other activities that we have carried out with NGOs such as Save the Children, Oxfam and Slow Food, with which we have an ongoing collaboration that is very solid and efficient. So this is just to give you an idea of how collaborating on such essential parts of our approach is essential to sustainability. Okay, so now I would like to start the second round, which President Colaninno had already introduced. So I will go back to President Barr and ask, even in a very synthetic way, we've seen what you have done all in your field in terms of sustainability now. I would like to understand in a flash, what is your vision in terms of future sustainability in your different fields? For you, Mr. Barr, of course, it concerns what type of mobility, sustainable mobility you are envisioning.
Yes, thank you. We are committed in Hitachi to being a climate change innovator and within Hitachi Group, and Hitachi Rail is a key part of that strategy. So Hitachi is a key partner of the COP26 Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in UK this year in the mobility category. And we believe this is a significant event and important in raising awareness for creating a decarbonised society. COP26 is a summit bringing countries together on a global scale to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change. So we are committed to align all of our businesses with the most ambitious of the Paris targets, and in particular to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So we recently announced our ambitions with emissions reductions targets across all of our group, including signing up to the UN's Race to Zero and Sustainable Development Goals. So our environmental vision states we will resolve environmental issues and achieve both a higher quality of life and a sustainable society in a collaborative creation with stakeholders. So we want to work with our customers and use digitalization to help them address the challenges they face. This can range from facilitating energy transition across the modes, as I mentioned earlier, to powering green mobility, and ultimately using that to decarbonize our own industry through methods within our factories, and also applying this to our major projects in large cities. Thank you.
Mr. Colaninno, please conclude what you were anticipating before. You were talking about your vision in terms of sustainable mobility, but, and this is a question also for Mr. Lavazza, do you have the feeling that there is more awareness among customers in terms of the importance of sustainable products. In the previous roundtable, we were saying that unless you increase awareness among final users or end customers, the risk is that the projects or the process stops at the last mile, before the last mile. So for the economic sustainability of your business, you need to have the support of your customers. Mr. Colaninno, over to you. I don't want to sound simplistic, but if you're in certain periods of the year in New Delhi, you cannot leave your hotel because you cannot breathe. The same happens in Mumbai, the same thing is in Cairo, and the same thing happens in New York. The same thing is happening in Milan and Rome. So I believe that customers are looking for better conditions for living. It's obvious and natural. So it's not so much the perception. So we know that customers' perceptions are changing in regard to the situation. The situation changes because there is a need to change. To us, the problem with innovation is when we can create something that is usable for the community, for the collective, not so much an invention for the invention's sake. And we are pursuing this goal with 3 clear points that underpin Piaggio's strategy. They're clear but very complex. The first point is that we have to change from thermal products to electric products or other products. For now, we're focusing on electric vehicles, which means being able to change the DNA of all factories that we have worldwide, because the whole world today is suffering from environmental problems. The second point is to create the preconditions to do so. The precondition in order for this change to take place. I'm thinking of cultural, financial, organizational issues that cannot be solved in a few years only. Third point, and I'll go back to my experience in Boston, it's important to have a visionary strategy, if I can use this word, to imagine what will happen after this transformation from heat to heat-powered vehicles to electric vehicles. I can't even imagine what will happen or how it will happen. But do consider that what leads us to consider these 3 points and include them in our strategy, in our operational strategy. Every year we have to move a step forward along this path. Well, what matters is what's happening around us. We have to take it into account. Probably we're not considering it because we'll become used to it. Online sales, large organizations are selling online. There's not just Amazon nowadays. You see lots of different boxes used for online deliveries. There is another topic that nowadays you can only read on the American press, and it's Bitcoin. The Bitcoin is a new technology of means and instruments that are being used as part of our daily life and are a key element in the financial context. This point is not being fully understood in Europe, and even our financial institutions are not really aware of this, whereas in the United States, it's now common practice and common knowledge in daily life, especially among young people. young people are more capable of participating into these extremely new things that are happening on the market more and more. Third point is culture, where we need to be able to find young people with the right culture to manage this transformation in these needs. I call them needs which are imperative for the whole planet. Thank you, Mr. Colaninno. Mr. Lavazza, well, quite rightly, Mr. Colaninno was saying that with regard to mobility and with regard to the market of Piaggio, it's more a need than the choice of a customer. Congestion of large urban areas makes it a need to change. In your case, customers are less conditioned by external factors. Do you notice an increase in awareness of end users, awareness of your investments in sustainability and innovation, because that would help companies to be more committed to innovation and become more virtuous and more sustainable? To us, this is an unstoppable process. We've seen that consumers in the food market in general are more and more curious, and they want to know what's behind the product. They want to know many things. First of all, they're explorers. They're more explorative than in the past, and they really want to have information, because there is also the whole topic of food security, which is becoming fundamental, and it's also one of the main reasons why people want to have more information. Traceability is key. They want to know the origin of the product, the characteristics. They want to be able to compare products. And also many different ways of consuming are emerging. This stems from the desire to be safer in what they do, but often this is a new cultural approach to the whole category. These two things are emerging quite strongly. They're not just emerging today. They started coming up years ago. There's a strong pressure from everywhere on the issues of sustainability and corporate social responsibility, and they're only increasing. So information linked to sustainability is challenging. To us, sustainability is the main guideline of everything that we do in terms of innovation. We do not know whether all the things that we do will be fully understood by the customers, but there are different levels of interpretation and perception, because we have many, many different types of customers, not just consumers, but maybe people interacting with our world, with our company, and interact with us and have an impact in terms of credibility and reputation. So all of these aspects are incredibly important. You cannot underestimate anything today. Every detail must be kept monitored. Innovation today is crucial also to stimulate a new approach that affects everything, and not just convenience, cost reduction, or assortment, or process efficiency, or process automation as it used to be. Today, we go even deeper. So being guided by sustainability sometimes means changing entire operational models. But this is very nice. It's stimulating, because it also allows to test the skills that you have in the company. It's a big magnet of talents and people who want to test themselves with a different reality, working with companies that are not only focused on the bottom line, but it's to be understood as an ecosystem, has a civil mission in its DNA. And it continues to work on values that in the past would only apply to smaller and specific realities, like your own local community or a welfare based on a family approach. Today, it needs to be extended on a national scale as a result of globalization. One of the effects of this globalization is the need to take a much bigger commitment and to compare yourself with others. So sustainability is a big driver in our company, especially as part as in innovation. By 2025, we will revolutionize the packaging as a whole. It will be compostable, recyclable completely. We've reorganized production to provide sustainable by design coffee machines. So we are integrating the concept of circular economy in our way of doing business. And so this will change a lot of premises. This also generates a number of new economies. So it's beneficial and certainly useful. That's why we're passionate about our decision to participate in the global sustainability cooperation. Coffee producers have an impact in terms of usage on natural resources, which has a consequence in terms of social sustainability. So it's even more important for us to monitor what we do and to implement measures that really allow to improve life for millions of people.